Hello, and welcome to California Death Row, where we're talking about it. There are currently 727 condemned inmates on California's death row, and today we're going to talk about the kidnapping and torture murder of a child actor. So Spencer Rawling Brasure, he was 27 years old at the time of the offense, which was September 7th, 1997. And he was on California's death row from August 28th, 1998 until November 14th, 2019, when he was found dead in his cell. So in September of 1996, Spencer and his girlfriend, Sonia Rodriguez, were living with Billy Davis at a house in Hawthorne owned by Billy's father. Spencer, Billy, Sonia, and another woman, Sandra Johnson, regularly used methamphetamine together and sold the drug to one another. The prosecution's evidence showed that in early September, with Sandra's help, Spencer and Billy kidnapped Anthony, with whom they were all acquainted with. Spencer and Billy tortured Anthony for some time at Billy's home. Spencer and Billy, and perhaps Matt Ormsby, eventually took Anthony to an isolated recreation area where they put him under a bush, doused him with gasoline, and set him alight. Sandra Johnson pled guilty to conspiracy to kidnap and agreed to testify truthfully in proceedings involving Anthony's death in exchange for a grant of probation with a jail sentence not to exceed 1 year. So Sandra, she entered in a plea deal, and that is what helped her stay away from the death penalty and being charged with a higher crime. So she testified, and it was actually used against Spencer. So Sandra testified in August of 1996. She, Billy, and Spencer discussed their grievances against Anthony. Sandra was annoyed because Anthony, who had expressed unrequited romantic feelings for her, had been following her around and paging her often, and on one occasion had thrown an ice pick at her. Anthony also acted paranoid and accused her of conspiring to get him hurt. Billy was angry at Anthony for stealing items from his house after staying with him and for hitting him on one occasion without provocation. Spencer was angry because some of the items Anthony took were his. They agreed Anthony should be beaten up, and Spencer said he and Billy would do it if Sandra would bring Anthony to them. A few days later, Sandra discussed this proposal with Scott Crosby, who was angry at Anthony for thefts and fights Anthony was involved in while staying with him. Sometime later, when Scott discovered where Anthony was then staying, he and Sandra formulated a plan to pick up Anthony and deliver him to Spencer. And this was on the pretext that they needed him to broker a drug deal, since Anthony was also a user. Spencer and Billy also have agreed, and they executed the plan. Sandra and Scott persuaded Anthony to accompany them, with Sandra driving and Anthony riding in the backseat of Sandra's two-door car, and they went to a fast food restaurant parking lot a few miles from Billy's house. Sandra telephoned Spencer, and he and Billy soon arrived in Spencer's pickup truck. Spencer took Scott's place in the front passenger seat of Sandra's car and at gunpoint ordered Anthony in the backseat to turn around. Spencer bounded Anthony's wrist with a plastic zip tie and directed Sandra to drive them to Billy's house. Sandra left them at Billy's house and then drove to Scott's and eventually to the home where she was staying. Later, Sandra received a page from Sonia, which was Spencer's girlfriend. When Sandra called her, Sonia asked Sandra to come and take her out of the house because these guys were crazy. Sandra drove to Billy's house and honked the horn for Sonia, but then fell asleep. About 45 minutes later, Billy came out to her car and told Sandra to come in. Following Billy into the home and down the hallway to the back room, Sandra twice heard a buzzing, crackling sound, followed by a moan or a whimper. And the back room is called the red room because the carpet was red. So guided into the red room by Billy, she smelled burned skin and saw Anthony lying across a chair. His hands and feet were tied together behind him, and his mouth was covered with duct tape. Spencer was standing in front of Anthony, holding a wire or rod attached to a car battery which was strapped to a large dolly. Spencer touched the wire or rod to Anthony's skin. Anthony jerked and cried, and Sandra smelled his skin burn. Spencer told Sandra to bend down and look Anthony in the eye. She saw there was a bump on his forehead. His nose was bloody. He looked scared and hurt, and there was 10-12 red spots on his body where he had been burned with this rod. Spencer laughingly asked Sandra if Anthony looked like a bitch. Afraid, Sandra answered that he did, then went into a smaller side room to see Sonia. Sandra asked Sonia how long this has been going on, and Sonia said a couple of hours. While talking to her, Sandra heard the buzzing sound several more times, followed by Anthony moaning. She had heard the voices of Spencer, Billy, and Matt Ormsby. From the small side room, Sandra heard Spencer laugh and tell Billy and Matt to get trash bags and a trash can. She then heard the sound of bags being opened, thudding, and a person whimpering. After she heard Spencer's truck start up and drive away, she and Sonia emerged from the small room. The red room was empty of people. The chair Anthony had been lying on, as well as the dolly and battery, were also gone. Sandra took Sonia to a donut shop for about a half hour and then dropped her back to Billy's house. After these events, Sandra went to Billy's house less often. On one occasion, Spencer told her he had put broken glass in Anthony's mouth, duct taped it shut, and then hit him in the face. Now, Nestor Lauterspada testified. Nestor testified he was drinking with Matt Ormsby outside a house near Billy's on the evening of September 7th, 1996. When Spencer shouted for Matt to come over to Billy's, Matt did so, and sometime later, Nestor followed him. Inside the back part of Billy's house, Matt led him to the red room. Nestor saw a man in a Halloween mask seated with his hands crossed in front of him. Spencer, standing next to him, said something like, "This is what we do with white trash." Nestor, afraid, left and told no one what he had seen. Joey March, Richard Lago, Ricardo Rivera, and James Luna all testified to incriminatory statements Spencer made after Anthony's death. Joey listened on a telephone conversation between Spencer and Billy, who was staying with Joey sometime after Anthony's death. Spencer told Billy that if he went down for Anthony's death, he would not go down alone. Billy responded in kind, and then the two reviewed what they had done together. Spencer said that after taking Anthony from the fast food restaurant parking lot at gunpoint, they took him to Billy's house and tied him up to the homemade electric chair. He offered Anthony a hit of methamphetamine, then shoved the glass pipe into Anthony's mouth. Both he and Billy, Spencer noted, burned Anthony with a torch. They also used crazy glue to glue Anthony's eyes shut. Joey was still listening on this conversation, which he testified to, and later Spencer recounted they took him in a van to a spot near Gorman, dumped him on the ground, causing his eyes to pop open and show his expression of pain, and doused him with gasoline. Spencer complained to Billy that because none of you guys had a lighter, he had to use a flare from the van to set Anthony alight. After providing this information to law enforcement officers, Joey received benefits in 2 of his own cases. So that's where another plea deal was considered, to where if he provided this information, it could help him in his other cases. Richard Lago testified. Richard testified that Spencer told him he had made an electric chair, used it over the course of several days on a man, then taken the victim to the desert in Ventura County and set him on fire. Spencer was laughing and getting kicks out of the story as he told it. Ricardo Rivera testified that Spencer told him he had used a car battery, transformer, and jumper cables, which belonged to Ricardo, to inflict pain on Anthony, the short dude with the Boston accent, then took the victim, who Spencer referred to as white trash, to the desert. James Luna testified that Spencer told him that he had made an electric chair and had electrocuted and killed a man who had gotten out of line. Anthony's body was found on September 13, 1996, at a campground in Hungry Valley State Vehicular Recreational Area near Gorman and Ventura County. His body was underneath a partly burned juniper bush. He had 3rd and 4th degree burns across his body. And 3rd degree burns are burns that extend through the entire dermis of your skin. And then 4th degree burns extends through the entire skin and into underlying fat, muscle, and bone. So in the degrees of burns, it goes 1st degree and 4th degree being the worst. In some areas, including the face, his flesh was darkly charred and split from burning. So if the heat is super, super hot, your bones will split. And that is what happened in this case. His eyes were collapsed and decomposed. His nose was flattened and his mouth charred and mummified. Anthony's body was later identified by dental records and a distinctive tattoo. The flesh on his legs had been eaten and gnawed by animals. The medical examiner was unable to assign a cause of death. Though there was soot in Anthony's airway, the presence of live maggots made it impossible to say the soot had entered by inhalation and not by the maggots transferring it to his airway. From the size of the maggots on Anthony's body, the medical examiner estimated Anthony had been in the juniper bush for a week or 2. A magnesium plate similar to those used by Billy's father in his printing business was found against Anthony's face. An X-ray showed a staple in his head, and there was a small fragment of glass in his mouth. Found at the scene was a flare cap, pieces of melted zip ties and duct tape, staples, a large trash can and liner, and a partly burned folding chair. Blood matched to Anthony's by DNA analysis was on the trash can liner. Human tissue was on the zip ties, and blood that could not be tested was on the magnesium plate and trash can. Anthony was 20 years old. So the Supreme Court of California decided on February 7th, 2008, and their decision was to affirm the judgment in its entirety, and that appeal is automatic. Now, what a defendant can do is petition for a writ of cert to the United States Supreme Court, and pretty much what it is telling the lower courts to produce the information that happened in the case, their decisions, the outcomes, and this is saying, Supreme Court, please listen to my case, and the United States Supreme Court has discretion of whether or not they want to hear a case. So Spencer petitioned, and his petition was denied on October 6, 2008, solidifying that what the Supreme Court of California was affirmed, and that judgment was going to stay. Now, what Spencer can do is petition a writ of habeas corpus, and he has to produce new evidence. But oftentimes, those are denied as well. So where is Spencer Rawlings Brasure now? So he was received by San Quentin State Prison on August 28th, 1998. He was found unresponsive in his cell on November 14th, 2019, and he was pronounced dead at 1:17 a.m. So he was on death row for 21 years before he died, and the CDCR lists his cause of death as acute drug toxicity. So somehow either got drugs to him or made some type of drug concoction, and this is what he died as. So all this information is a matter of public record, going to the CDCR, looking for his name, his cause of death, or looking the Supreme Court of California or United States Supreme Court for his case. So if you want to know what the news said, you can go Google that, but everything today was from what the United States Supreme Court received, as well as the Supreme Court of California. Please give us a follow, a like, a subscribe, whatever floats your boat. Floats your boat. If you want to comment, we always comment back, but thank you for listening.